For 10 years, Duke Adrian Ashford and his wife Helena gave society every reason to believe their marriage was respectable. They attended the same dinners, appeared together at court, and hosted Christmas at Ashford Hall. They stood beside one another whenever photographers or visiting dignitaries required the image of a united household. There were no public arguments, no embarrassing separations, and no rumors of mistresses attached to Adrian's name. To almost everyone who knew them, that was enough to call the marriage successful. Only the two people inside it understood how little remained. Adrian was not cruel. He had never humiliated Helena, controlled her money, or broken his vows. He remembered her birthday, provided generously for every charitable project she supported, and never failed to offer his arm when they entered a ballroom. What he had stopped doing was asking questions to which the answer might matter. Somewhere between estate reports, Parliament, and the comfortable repetition of married life, Adrian had begun treating Helena's presence as permanent. He knew which flowers she preferred on the breakfast table but no longer knew what frightened her. He knew which jewels she wore to court but could not remember the last book she had loved enough to discuss over dinner. Helena had noticed the change long before he did. At first, she tried to fight it. She suggested journeys they might take together, waited in Adrian's study after dinner, and occasionally asked him whether he was happy. His answers were always kind, but they were also brief. Eventually, Helena stopped asking. Then Lord Julian Vale began to notice the questions Adrian no longer did. Julian was 38, charming without appearing to try, and expected to inherit the considerable fortune of his childless uncle, the Earl of Wexford. He appeared frequently at the same country gatherings as the Ashfords, and what began as conversation gradually became intimacy. He asked Helena what she was reading. He remembered when she mentioned wanting to see Florence again. When she spoke, he did not glance toward the door as though another obligation were already waiting. Helena knew where the friendship was going long before she stopped it from going there. Adrian discovered the affair on a rainy November afternoon. He had entered Helena's private sitting room looking for a volume of poetry she had borrowed from his library. The room was empty, and the book lay open on the window seat. When he lifted it, a folded letter slipped from between the pages and landed beside his shoe. He might have returned it unread. Instead, he saw his wife's name. Then one sentence. "When Wexford is mine, you will never have to spend another evening pretending you are happy beside him." Adrian read the line twice. Helena found him half an hour later in the library. He was standing beside the fire with the letter in his hand. She stopped immediately. Neither of them pretended not to understand. "How long?" Adrian asked. Helena closed the door behind her. "Several months." His expression barely changed, but his fingers tightened around the paper. "Is he your lover?" "Yes." There was no excuse in her answer, and somehow that made it worse. Adrian looked toward the fire for a moment before asking, "Do you love him?" Helena could have lied then. She could have said she was confused, lonely, flattered, or foolish. All of those things were true. But not enough. "Yes." Adrian nodded once. The movement was so controlled that Helena almost wished he would shout. Instead, he asked the question that would divide their lives into before and after. "Are you prepared to end it?" Helena looked at the man she had married at 26. The man she had once waited for at breakfast because she loved hearing him complain about political speeches. The man whose silence had slowly become the most reliable thing in their marriage. She thought of Julian. Then she said, "No." Adrian's face changed at last. Not dramatically. He did not raise his voice or accuse her of destroying him. He simply looked as though something he had believed permanent had disappeared while he was still standing inside it. That evening, Ashford House was full of guests. A weekend shooting party had brought a dozen families to the estate. And dinner was due to begin within the hour when whispers started moving through the entrance hall. Julian had ordered his carriage. Adrian came downstairs just as Helena appeared at the top of the staircase carrying a small traveling case. The conversation below faltered. Several servants looked away. Julian stood near the front doors. Adrian looked from him to Helena. For one terrible moment, Helena wanted her husband to stop her. Not because she had changed her mind, but because some part of her still wanted proof. That leaving would wound him enough to make him fight. Adrian did not give her that comfort. "Are you choosing him?" he asked. The question was quiet, but every person close enough to hear it became still. Helena looked at Julian, then back at the husband beside whom she had spent 10 years. Yes. Adrian absorbed the answer before stepping aside. Then do not tell yourself tomorrow that I made the choice for you. Helena's eyes filled, but she refused to look away. I won't. She walked past him. Adrian did not stop her when Julian opened the door, and he did not follow when the carriage carried them away from Ashford House. Much later, after the guests had withdrawn and the entrance hall was finally quiet, the steward approached him beneath Helena's portrait. Your Grace, should we have it removed? Adrian looked up. The portrait showed Helena at 28, only 2 years into their marriage, still smiling as though she expected the future to be kind. No. The steward hesitated. Your Grace. Adrian kept his eyes on the woman in the painting. She was my wife for 10 years. I will not rewrite 10 years because of one terrible choice. Then he walked away. What Adrian did not yet know was that Helena's choice had not finished costing either of them. And the man she had chosen over her husband was about to discover that the fortune on which he had built their future did not belong to him at all. For the first few weeks after leaving Ashford Hall, Helena believed she had done the bravest thing of her life. The house Julian rented outside London was smaller than anything she had lived in since childhood. But that difference initially felt like freedom rather than loss. There were no formal dinners unless they wanted them, no steward appearing with schedules. No expectation that Helena dress for guests she had no interest in seeing. Julian joined her for breakfast, listened when she spoke, and seemed genuinely amused by things Adrian would once have acknowledged with a distracted smile. Before returning to estate reports, Helena knew how the story looked from the outside. A duchess had abandoned a faithful husband for another man and fled the security of one of England's oldest houses. Society called her reckless, selfish, even ridiculous. Perhaps they were right about some of it. Still, when Julian sat beside her in the evenings and asked what she wanted to do the following day, Helena felt something she had not felt in years, chosen. Julian often spoke about the future, and almost every version of that future began with the same phrase. When Wexford is mine. When Wexford was his, they would buy a house near the coast. When Wexford was his, he would settle several inconvenient debts. When Wexford was his, the same people who whispered about Helena now would suddenly become remarkably forgiving. At first, she heard those promises as optimism. Julian's uncle, the Earl of Wexford, was elderly, childless, and had always been expected to leave the bulk of his estate to his nephew. Everyone knew it. Gradually, however, Helena began to notice how little of Julian's imagined future existed without that inheritance. One afternoon, she found him studying a stack of unpaid bills. You said those had been settled. Julian quickly gathered them. They will be. When? He gave her the charming smile that had once made uncertainty feel exciting. When Wexford is mine. Helena did not smile back. You speak of your uncle's death as though it were an income date. Julian's expression tightened. That is not what I mean. Then perhaps stop building every plan around it. He came around the desk and kissed her forehead. You worry too much. Helena almost laughed at the irony. For years she had wanted a man who listened to her concerns. Now she had found one who could listen beautifully and still dismiss what he did not wish to hear. 2 months after she left Adrian, the Earl of Wexford died. Julian departed early for the reading of the will, wearing mourning black and an expression of carefully restrained expectation. Helena remained at the rented house, telling herself she did not care how much he inherited. She had not left Ashford because Julian might become wealthy. She repeated that truth several times during the afternoon because the need to repeat it had begun to trouble her. He returned after dark. The front door opened and Helena immediately knew something had happened. Julian entered without removing his coat. His face had gone pale and for once he seemed unable to manufacture an expression that made events appear less serious than they were. Helena rose. What happened? He walked past her toward the sitting room. Julian. He poured brandy with an unsteady hand. Helena followed. What did your uncle leave you? Julian laughed once without humor. His watch. She frowned. What else? Nothing. Helena stared at him. Julian dropped into a chair. He changed the will 2 years ago. Apparently he discovered the full extent of my debts and decided I lacked the judgment to manage Wexford. What happened to the estate? A cousin receives the land. Most of the investments go into trusts and charities. Helena looked at the old gold watch he had placed on the table. All those years. Yes. His voice hardened. All those years of behaving like a dutiful nephew, and he leaves me a watch. Helena sat opposite him. We will manage. Julian looked at her. For a moment neither spoke. Then he said, of course. But something in the way he looked at her made Helena uneasy. The creditors arrived within days. At first Julian assured her the situation was temporary. Then came the wine collection, several paintings, and a pair of silver candlesticks Helena had never particularly liked. She did not complain. She had chosen this life. If choosing Julian meant living more modestly, then she would live modestly. But one evening, he found her fastening a sapphire necklace before dinner. His gaze remained on it longer than usual. How much is that worth? Helena's fingers stopped. I don't know. You must have some idea. It belonged to my mother. I am not asking who owned it. She turned toward him. What are you asking? Julian seemed to realize how the conversation sounded. We need liquidity. Only temporarily. We are building a life together. Her eyes lifted to his. You said that before you knew we would have to build it without your uncle's money. Julian stepped back. You think I only wanted you because of money? I did not say that. You did not have to. The argument ended without resolution, but after that, Helena began noticing things she had previously excused. Julian spoke less about Florence and more about creditors. He complained that Adrian had kept control of too many assets after Helena left. He asked whether the Duchess's personal allowance continued while she lived apart from her husband. When Helena answered that she had no intention of demanding more than what legally belonged to her, Julian became impatient. After 10 years of marriage, surely Ashford owes you something. Helena looked at him sharply. For what? For 10 years of your life. Adrian did not purchase 10 years from me. He neglected you. Yes. So why protect him? I am not protecting him. Helena's voice cooled. I am refusing to turn my unhappiness into an invoice. Julian paced toward the window. You gave him the best years of your life. And then I betrayed him. Shall I charge him for that too? He said nothing. Helena realized then that Julian's resentment toward Adrian had shifted. When Wexford's fortune seemed certain, Adrian was just the husband blocking their freedom. Now Adrian symbolized something else: money, security, a resource Julian thought Helena should still access. The final break happened a week later. Julian entered the sitting room with a wooden box Helena knew instantly. Her letters. Dozens of them. Letters written during the affair before she left Ashford House. Why do you have those out? Julian placed the box on the desk. I've been thinking. That rarely starts well these days. He ignored the comment. If those letters went public, the scandal would be extremely damaging to Ashford. Helena's stomach tightened. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting Adrian understands discretion. He does. And he can afford it. Helena stared at him. Julian continued more cautiously. He would pay a considerable amount to keep these private. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. Then the meaning became impossible to soften. You want to blackmail my husband. I want us to survive. No. Helena stepped away from the desk. You want Adrian to finance the life you promised me. That's not fair. Neither is using letters I wrote because I trusted you as a weapon against the man I betrayed to be with you. Julian's patience finally snapped. What would you prefer? Poverty? Watching everything slip away because you're suddenly too honorable to use the advantages you still have. The word advantages hit her harder than if he'd shouted. Not love. Not courage. Advantages. Helena looked at the man for whom she had walked past her husband and out of Ashford House. She remembered Adrian quietly asking, "Are you choosing him?" She had said yes. And Adrian had warned her not to pretend later that someone else had made the choice. He had been right. This choice was hers. So would be the next one. Helena went upstairs, packed a single case, and returned in less than 20 minutes. Julian stared at it. You cannot be serious. I was serious the night I left my husband. I am equally serious now. Where will you go? To a small property my mother left me. And then what? Helena looked at the box of letters. I will decide that without you. She left before midnight. This time, there was no Duke waiting at the bottom of the stairs, no servants pretending not to watch. And no man opening a carriage door toward a promised future. Only Helena. The following morning, Adrian Ashford received a letter in handwriting he hadn't seen since his wife walked out of his house. It contained a single warning: Julian has our letters. I believe he intends to use them against you. Adrian read the sentence twice. Then he folded the page carefully. Helena had left him for Julian Vale. Now she had left Julian too, but if she imagined that walking away from her lover meant she could simply walk back into Ashford House, she was about to discover that some doors did not reopen merely because the person outside had finally learned why leaving had been a mistake. Adrian received Helena at Ashford House 3 days after her warning letter arrived. He did not meet her in the drawing room where they had once entertained guests together, nor in the library where he had discovered Julian's first letter. Instead, he chose a smaller morning room near the East Garden, a place without memories powerful enough to speak for either of them. Helena entered alone. She looked different. Not dramatically. She was still composed, still elegant, still unmistakably the woman who had once moved through Ashford House. As though every room belonged partly to her. But there was no confidence in her now that came from being Duchess Ashford. And none of the defiant certainty she had carried on the night she left with Julian. Adrian remained standing. What does he want? Helena understood immediately. Money. How much? I did not ask. Adrian's expression hardened. If he has letters capable of embarrassing this family, I need to know what price he intends to place on them. I did not come here so you could pay him. Then why did you come? Because they are my letters too. Helena stepped farther into the room. I wrote them. I betrayed you in them. If they become public, I will not allow you to purchase silence and pretend the shame belongs only to Julian. Adrian studied her. You think refusing to pay him will restore your dignity? No. The answer came without hesitation. I think that's something I may never fully restore. For the first time, the anger in Adrian's face shifted into something quieter. Helena continued. But I will not allow you to buy back the dignity I threw away. Adrian turned toward the window. What do you propose? I tell the truth first. He looked back at her. Helena had spent several sleepless nights considering what Julian could actually do with the letters. Their greatest value came from secrecy. If society believed Helena had been seduced, manipulated, or driven from her marriage by an impossibly cold husband, the letters could expose details that would feed scandal for months. But if Helena admitted what she had done before anyone else could reveal it, Julian's weapon became much weaker. Adrian understood the logic. You realize what people will say about you. They already say worse things when they think I am hiding something. You may never recover your position. Helena gave a small, tired smile. I think leaving you in front of half the county settled that question. 2 evenings later, Helena attended a charitable reception where several families who had known the Ashfords for years were present. Rumors about Julian's financial collapse had already reached London, and whispers followed Helena almost as soon as she entered the room. She did not wait for the gossip to grow. When one acquaintance cautiously asked whether Lord Vale had misled her into leaving her husband, Helena answered clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. No. The woman looked surprised, and Helena drew a slow breath. Adrian failed to see how deeply unhappy I had become, and I failed to insist that he see it. Several people listened more openly now. Helena continued, but I chose to betray my marriage. Lord Vale did not force me to write to him, love him, or leave my husband. Those were my choices. Someone murmured that perhaps Ashford's neglect had driven her to it. Helena shook her head. You neglected our marriage, she would later tell Adrian, and I betrayed it. Those are not the same sin. That evening, she expressed the same truth publicly. 2 wrongs may explain how a marriage failed. They do not excuse each other. By the end of the week, Julian's letters had lost much of their power. They could still humiliate Helena, but they could no longer expose a secret she was pretending did not exist. Julian eventually abandoned the attempt to sell them. Adrian heard about Helena's public admission from someone else. He did not congratulate her. He understood enough by then to know that accountability was not bravery performed for applause. Several days later, Helena asked to see him again. This time, she did not mention Julian. She sat across from Adrian in the same morning room and asked the question she had been avoiding since leaving her lover. "Can you ever forgive me?" Adrian did not answer immediately. He had imagined this moment too many times after she left. In some versions, he was cruel. In others, he was generous enough to welcome her back without hesitation. Neither fantasy survived once Helena was sitting in front of him. "Perhaps," he said at last. Her eyes lowered. "And us?" Adrian looked at the woman he had loved for more than a decade and understood something painful. Love remained. Trust did not. "I may someday forgive you, Helena." She looked. "But forgiveness is not the same thing as wanting our marriage back." The words wounded her. Adrian saw it. He did not take them back. Helena nodded slowly. "I understand." And for the first time, Adrian believed she truly did. Their marriage ended quietly after that. No dramatic public battle followed. Helena retained the income and property that legally belonged to her, moved permanently into the small house inherited from her mother, and began assisting a charitable residence for widows and women suddenly left without stable households. Adrian returned to Ashford Estate. There he met Catherine Mercer. She was 35, widowed for 6 years, and responsible for a small school serving children from several estate villages. Their first conversation was not remotely romantic. She told him his proposed budget was inadequate. Adrian stared at the figures. "I increased it by 20%. And increased enrollment by nearly 30. You might have begun with thank you. You might have begun with arithmetic." To his surprise, Adrian laughed. Catherine did not treat him like a wounded husband or a duke recovering from scandal. She cared whether the school roof leaked, whether teachers were paid properly, and whether the children had enough coal through winter. Nothing more. They worked together frequently over the following months, and Adrian found himself looking forward to those meetings without understanding why. Helena saw them together for the first time almost half a year after leaving Julian. She had come to Ashford Village regarding a charitable donation and happened to pass the school as Adrian and Catherine stepped outside. Catherine said something Helena could not hear. Adrian laughed. Not politely. Not because a room required him to. He simply laughed. Helena stopped walking. There was nothing improper in the scene. Catherine stood several feet away. Adrian did not touch her, yet Helena understood immediately that something was changing. For months she had been learning to accept that Adrian might never take her back. Only then did she recognize the harder possibility. One day he might not merely forgive her. He might love someone else. Nearly a year after Helena left Ashford House, she had learned that regret did not disappear simply because life became quieter. She lived comfortably in the small house inherited from her mother, and spent much of her time helping manage a charitable residence for widows and women who had suddenly lost secure homes. The work did not erase what she had done, but it gave her days a purpose that belonged entirely to her. For the first time in many years, Helena wasn't measuring herself by whether she was a good duchess, a neglected wife, or the woman Julian Vale had promised to rescue. She was simply learning how to live with her own choices. Her relationship with Adrian had also changed. They could now speak without cruelty and occasionally even without sadness, though neither pretended friendship had repaired the marriage. Adrian had kept his word. He did not punish her financially, did not use society to humiliate her, and never suggested that forgiveness required reconciliation. What Helena had not expected was Catherine Mercer. At first, she heard Catherine's name only in connection with the school at Ashford. Then it began appearing more often in ordinary conversation. Catherine had convinced Adrian to increase teachers' salaries. Catherine had reorganized a winter meal program. Catherine had apparently argued with him for 20 minutes over whether repairing a school roof counted as an emergency. The stories made Helena smile despite herself. Then at a spring gathering on the estate, she saw them together. Catherine stood beside Adrian near the terrace, speaking animatedly while he listened. She said something Helena could not hear, and Adrian laughed with the easy warmth that had disappeared from their marriage years before. Helena felt the loss immediately. Not jealousy exactly. Recognition. Later that evening, she found Adrian alone near the library doors. "Do you love her?" I think I am beginning to. Helena looked down. For several seconds, she could not speak. Did you ever stop loving me? Adrian's expression softened. No. Her eyes lifted. He continued carefully. I simply learned that loving you was not enough reason to remain your husband. The words hurt, but Helena knew they were not meant as punishment. Perhaps that was why they hurt more. Love had survived. The marriage had not. Several weeks later, Adrian told Catherine how he felt. She did not respond the way society might have expected a schoolmistress being courted by a duke to respond. There was no astonished gratitude and certainly no immediate acceptance. Instead, she said, I will not become the woman you choose because your wife disappointed you. Adrian absorbed the accusation without defensiveness. Then do not. Catherine studied him. He continued, let me come back when I can prove that I am choosing you because you are you. So he did. Their courtship developed slowly over the following months. Adrian continued supporting the school without turning Catherine's work into an excuse to see her. He learned the names of her teachers, listened when she disagreed with him, and did not use his rank to rush a decision she had every right to make slowly. Helena heard about the courtship. She did not interfere. Then Julian returned one final time. He was preparing to leave England after arranging enough of his debts to begin again elsewhere. Whatever charm had once made his confidence irresistible now seemed tired. They met in a public garden. After several awkward minutes, Julian asked, if Wexford had left me everything, would you still be with me? Helena had asked herself the same question many times. She could have protected herself with a noble answer. Instead, she told the truth, perhaps. Julian looked surprised. Helena continued, and that frightens me more than leaving you does. Because if the inheritance had arrived, if the creditors had disappeared, and the promised house in Italy had become real, she might have spent years believing their relationship was something it had never truly been. Helena shook her head. Adrian's forgiveness does not belong to me simply because I finally understand what I did. For the first time, neither Julian nor Helena had another future to offer the other. They said goodbye. Months later, Adrian proposed to Catherine. There was no ballroom and no crowd waiting to applaud. They stood in the school garden after the children had gone home, surrounded by the ordinary evidence of the life Catherine had built long before Adrian entered it. I spent too many years believing marriage survived simply because two people had promised it would, Adrian told her. If you marry me, I will never mistake the promise for the work required to keep it. Catherine raised an eyebrow. That sounds dangerously like another promise. Adrian smiled. Then hold me to it. She did. When news of their engagement reached Helena, she sat alone with the letter for a long time. It hurt. But she did not go to Ashford. She did not ask Adrian to remember what they once had. Instead, she folded the letter carefully and returned to the work waiting on her desk. Weeks later, an acquaintance asked whether she regretted leaving Adrian now that Julian had inherited nothing. Helena considered the question before answering, I regret betraying my husband. The woman waited. Helena continued. But I do not regret learning that regret cannot always restore what we destroy. At Ashford, Adrian began preparing for a marriage that would not resemble the one he had lost. And Helena continued building a life that belonged to no husband and no lover. She had once believed the worst consequence of choosing the wrong man would be discovering that he had nothing. In the end, the harder lesson was discovering that the man she had left could forgive her completely and still choose someone else.